Good day, everybody, and thank you for joining the session today. We're going to be talking a little bit about FinOps strategies in the technology value era, and specifically about how we can win in the AI cost game. A big thanks, of course, for Jevon from IDC for his session. Some super useful statistics and some learning for me there, for sure. So let's get started. I'm Jeremy Chaplin. I lead the FinOps practice here at Flexera globally. Super lucky to be working with a team of cost specialists, FinOps advisors, solution architects, and technical account managers that are helping our customers be successful in the FinOps space. And a great opportunity to connect with you all today. Really looking forward to sharing with you some insights here. We're sticking, of course, with the Olympic theme. So our road to gold here, FinOps in the AI era. What does it really look like in the market today with the introduction of AI and the proliferation of AI spend? And then we're going to tackle this new event. How do we as FinOps practitioners wrestle with the costs, the visibility, the new challenges that AI brings? Let's get a bit of understanding there. And of course, rather than work harder, we're going to be looking at how we train smarter here and maybe leverage AI to tackle the problem itself. Great, of course, using it to run workloads and have FinOps to drive value out of our AI costs, but maybe we can use it to help ourselves with some of the complexity that we face there. And then, well, this isn't a single race, unfortunately. We're competing here across every scope. Looking forward, of course, to hearing from Steve from the FinOps Foundation, but the FinOps practitioners out there will know now that really the FinOps framework isn't just for our cloud spend. It covers all of your technology spend. And of course, when we think about AI specifically, that, of course, spans a number of domains. And then hopefully we're home for the win. We're out on the podium here. Really looking forward to taking some questions from you that I'll hopefully be able to answer here live today. Please post them in the chat on the Q&A panel here. And then when we get to the end, I'll be able to kind of close things out and hopefully answer some of those questions. So let's dive in. Road to gold. What does FinOps look like right now in the AI era? And of course, some big numbers from Jevon from IDC, but even bigger numbers here, $2.something trillion in AI spend, a forecast from Gartner. And this was a forecasted number back in 2025. You'll see as I go through some of the deck here, we have more accurate and up-to-date numbers from Gartner, and the projections are just getting bigger. Now, this tells us, of course, that this is a mammoth problem for us to address. Right? Not only have we seen prolific growth in cloud spend and technology spend generally, but AI is outpacing that, growing massively to be really the top source of technology cost for all organizations today. And I've even seen some statistics, more recently that talk about, tech spend, AI spend, cloud spend actually exceeding companies' investment in human capital. Right? This is how important it is becoming for organizations in order to tackle this challenge. So what does that challenge look like? What challenges are you as an organization facing? And again, you think of something different, please pop it in the chat or save a question for later. But we're struggling to manage this prolific growth here. 44% year on year. As I say, the latest projections around $2.5 trillion in AI spend. And visibility, always a struggle for sure. Getting insight into where that cost is going, where the spend is going, who is generating the cost. But it's not always a cost conversation, is it? It's also about sustainability data and other metrics that are important to your business. It's great to use AI to produce your PowerPoint deck or a framework template or produce a custom image. But what is the cost of that and how is that measured? And then what is the implications of that from a kind of carbon emissions perspective? So AI bringing additional complexity. Cloud was a big change, certainly in my lifetime during tech. AI is a step up. It's a level up in terms of the complexity. We already had bursty workloads and things that was auto scaling. Well, that can never be truer now than, in the AI space. We've got complexity in how things are built and all of the kind of models and changes that underpin the kind of cost drivers. We need to get smart here. We need to be thinking about autonomous ways of dealing with that. And of course, we're going to look at AI for FinOps as we go through the agenda today. So don't want to, of course, take away from Steve's session later. He'll be joining us, from the FinOps Foundation. But of course, there are some interesting stats here. The FinOps Foundation mission sits at the top of this page. And hopefully those of you that are close to the foundation know, of course, the change recently at the end here, not just advancing the people who manage the value of cloud, but now the people who are managing the value of technology. Real recognition here that the problem is more than just public cloud, and indeed that the framework itself is so well positioned to help us manage that technology spend wherever it sits. And then we can see, of course, right to left, the ever increasing number of practitioners, right? This is practitioner-led data from the state of FinOps by the foundation, telling us that up to nearly all, 98% of practitioners are managing AI spend. And ultimately, for me, I see that as being driven by an aggregate of AI in SaaS, AI in your private or public clouds, AI sitting in the data center. And importantly, then, what about licensing? What about software? Because ultimately, we're all using software powering, our applications and our infrastructure here. So real recognition, I think, in the marketplace around the challenges that we're facing today. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention before we kind of jump in and look at how we can, leverage FinOps for AI and AI for FinOps is where the kind of challenge first starts. And I see this as being actually initially a procurement problem, right? We have to go out and buy and procure the software, the infrastructure, the models, and everything else that are powering our AI, whether we build it ourselves, whether we buy it ourselves. So at the point of procurement, when I'm buying a license, or I'm buying the number of tokens, or I'm buying conversations or resolutions, which are these new, charging and pricing and usage-based models that are being introduced for AI, this is where I have the opportunity to negotiate the price per the assist, price per resolution. And in order to do that effectively, of course, I need an aggregate understanding of what I'm spending, what I'm using, and with the vendors. So just think a little bit about, how early in the journey this starts. The FinOps Foundation, of course, would talk about shift left. Can we optimize before we've actually built and run these things? And of course, in this context, absolutely we can, if we think about it at the point of procurement. All right, so let's jump in. The new event, FinOps for AI. How do we leverage FinOps to look at our AI spend and kind of manage the cost in the way that we've been successfully doing for public cloud? Back to the statistic that we saw earlier, 98% of you are saying, as practitioners, we're being asked to manage AI spend. So this is not a problem that's a niche issue, right? You're all facing these challenges and all wrestling with that to some degree. Flexera, however, runs their own survey, the State of Cloud report. We have the 2026 version out here, and I would encourage you to go and look at that. Some interesting statistics for sure. But no surprises, I guess, in the top challenges that we see for managing those AI workloads. And we've kind of touched on these a little bit as we've gone through so far. Unpredictability, the difficult, in forecast, understanding usage patterns, maybe things that we've just started to grasp when we were dealing with public cloud and the volatility of usage-based billing, but made even worse by the complexity and the bursty nature, of AI consumption. And then we've got challenges in the infrastructure layer, GPU, CPU. How do we do those things? Maybe, we're kind of used to working and doing kind of right-sizing tasks, but we've not just got the challenge there, we've got the challenge at the data layer now as well. How is my GPU and CPU consumption impacted by the training that I'm running, which is underpinned by the data and data clouds potentially that I'm using here? So complex pricing, all of those new terms, all of those new usage characteristics that the vendors are using in order to monetize their AI services that we're buying. Challenges, of course, as I've said, in the data. And lastly here, a lack of mature FinOps practices. I'm surprised this is only, kind of 12%, but I guess relative to the other challenges here, it kind of underpinned by the challenges and the skills gaps that we all, know exist as we start to tackle the new technologies that are being introduced here. And thinking about that, right, the challenge expands into being, again, a new visibility gap that we have. right? We had this challenge, of course, with public cloud and a lack of tooling, and the problem is now proliferated to be, well, all of those domains, all of those scopes where you're running infrastructure that is powering AI, powering this $2.5 trillion. And if we can't solve that gap, then we can't address the kind of capabilities that we're now familiar with using when we think about the FinOps framework, right? We can't do our budgeting and forecasting and address those issues around volatility. We can't, build a show back and charge back model. How do we understand how we could procure or negotiate anything? And then, of course, the governance models and licensing and dealing with that kind of challenge. So lots of issues that if we don't get proper visibility of the spend and where it sits, we're going to be really challenged in terms of trying to address that. So, managing your AI adoption and spend and understanding what you're buying and what you're building is really important for us to differentiate and think about. Jevin had a couple of stats actually that I took note of as I was watching his session, right? SaaS to PaaS is dominating AI spend. Thinking about that, right? What is the AI that you've purchased here? And he also said usage and tiering in SaaS pricing creates risk. Absolutely, those different pricing models and usage models that we're wrestling with here. So you can see the correlation, understanding what we've bought, understanding how it's priced, but also then wrestling with the challenge that exists in the public cloud domain, the things that I'm building already, my new models. How do I bring these together? And I have to do that by bringing FinOps, traditional FinOps in the public cloud, and SaaS, together. And that's why we're seeing that high statistic of 90% or plus of SaaS practitioners saying that they're being asked, or FinOps practitioners saying they're being asked to, manage SaaS costs as well as cloud costs. So we also need to have an understanding of what's driving that spend, right? If we don't know the business drivers and the drivers of cost, then of course we're blind to be able to optimize that. And we may be a little bit familiar with the infrastructure level. It's quite similar, of course. It's compute and it's storage that is running these AI workloads and AI applications that we have. And of course, the objective here is to match that usage, whether it's CPU or GPU, to the demand that we have. But that becomes even more challenging when we don't know how many tokens, how many outcomes, how many chats, how many conversations are going to be had here. So certainly something to think about. But then also in the storage space, we add some additional complexity here in terms of the data processing. AI underpinned typically by big data, whether it's lake houses or whatever storage that you're using, often by the Databricks, Snowflake, organizations. The data clouds is, I think, the terminology that the FinOps Foundation are using. And we've got to look at that challenge quite seriously. There's a lot of cost, not just in the storage, but the analytics of that. And then if that data is then underpinning models and the training that we need to do, having that data in the right shape and normalized and as efficient as possible is really going to impact the cost. And then lastly, we sit on top of that AI models, which also, if you don't pick the right model for your use case, has a fundamental impact on cost. So we really need to start to think about, well, do we have the right personas? Do we have the right skills, the right knowledge, and the right people around the table? Is it a data scientist that I need to actually bring into these conversations, as well as my engineer and my finance person and my license person and FinOps persona? So just think broadly about, what you know about these, where the expertise sits in the organization as you're thinking about tackling and wrestling this problem. Now, of course, we want to be smart about what we're doing, and there's opportunities here which are great and very exciting for us to leverage AI to tackle the problem itself. Flip the coin around a little bit. What can we use AI for to help us on that FinOps journey? And here at Flexera, we've heard, of course, from our customers asking us to leverage AI for what they want to do, not just, of course, in helping them understand the growing AI spend and where it exists across, a complex estate. Again, Jevin mentioning hybrid cloud and most customers running some sort of hybrid environment. So we need that visibility across all scopes, but also bringing AI capabilities to the platform to help in terms of reducing spend, produce automatic recommendations, produce autonomous outcomes using agents and so on, as well as kind of natural language interaction. And we'll come and talk a little bit more about that. And obviously using, the data that we have then in a clean, curated way, normalized way to power our customers' applications themselves. Because success in the AI space right now is definitely about the underpinning data. If you can't put the right data in, then we know that the outcomes are not going to be the things that you desire. So AI-powered value from Flexera One is really, the foundation of our platform, built, of course, in a secure, compliant, and reliable way. But the magic happens at the inventory layer. This is where we've got data across all of the different scopes that we've described: hardware, the software, the AI spend, the cloud spend, and it's enriched and normalized. And that's really important, because if I've got a workload running over here and it's running a particular license, but I can't correlate that with the licenses that I've purchased from the vendor, as a software asset manager, how do I know whether I could use that license to drive out cost and get rid of a pay-as-you-go license and bring my own? We know, of course, the SKUs and the naming conventions are often very different here. So having that normalized layer is really important. And we have the ability to enrich it. Let's say, for example, bringing sustainability data to the inventory data that we have, so that you can understand not just the cost impact, but the carbon impact of the changes that you want to make. Now, we sit AI insights over the top of that, okay? And that's where we can be super successful here, having that data layer, as we said, super accurate. Then the insights that we produce, we have confidence in, and of course, configured in our applications, your business context. How does that spend map to applications, departments, cost centers is really critical in making sense of the recommendations that we produce in the context of your own business, right? The business context, of course, key to making decisions. And then lastly, adding automation and agentic AI onto those kind of solutions. Already things in place that we'll talk about, with things like PHOPS that are managing commitment purchases for our customers, and our Kubernetes solution, Ocean, that is running and provisioning workloads, in spot compute to power, Kubernetes environments that reduce costs. So lots of opportunities there to use automation to make our lives easier. So drilling into that just a little bit further, we've got both sides of the coin here. We've got AI for FinOps, okay? Asking questions in a natural language approach, getting tailored insights, getting some insights really that maybe you're not going to make yourself, because you can't, possibly as a human, process and analyze the massive amounts of data that underpins that. And then, of course, using AI-powered automation to do some of those complex things, or do some of those things at scale, again, that it's not possible to do, human-powered. And then the other side of the coin, FinOps for AI, making sure that we've got the visibility and a set of recommendations that operate at all levels of the technology stack, right? Understanding that stack, getting visibility in all places, super important there, as well as using the tools and using AI itself. Now, that manifests itself in a number of ways, but one of those is, interaction with the data from a natural language perspective, bringing your business context, the technology stack, and the assets that we understand, but then having some knowledge of your business objectives. And there's an example on the screen here, free up spend for innovation. What could I do? I've interacted with some of these tools that we have. What can I spend my time most efficiently on? I have 2 hours today. Where should I focus my time in reducing cost in this particular application, because I've seen spikes? Those kind of questions, where your business context and your business objectives are fed in, and then the big data analyzed by these natural language and agentic AI models to get answers, that we wouldn't necessarily be able to produce ourselves. So exciting times. This, unfortunately, is a decathlon, though, not just a single race that we have to do, right? So every scope is a challenge for us to address, right? We have to bring in the data from the different scopes where you have technology spend, or we're not seeing the complete picture. And we can see here, of course, the statistics that we've seen in terms of ownership and responsibility by FinOps practitioners, and changes in the reporting lines of those teams as well. There's real acceleration of the expansion of FinOps ownership across those different scopes, and organizations bringing teams together under the same reporting line, whether that's a collaboration or a convergence of those teams, to get those kind of outcomes and understand how we can work together and get a kind of 1 + 1 = 3 outcome here. Each team, of course, has different priorities, and each scope has different needs. And so the FinOps framework, super flexible in the way that the domains and capabilities are broken down. Rate optimization doesn't make sense in the data center because we've already purchased that and there are no rate levers necessarily to pull. But it would make sense, of course, in public cloud and possibly in the SaaS space and data cloud space. Budgeting and forecasting, however, is relevant across all of those. And it's really important, to recognize and look at the tooling landscape. As a provider, Flexera covers all of the domains, all of the capabilities, and of course, all of the scopes. So you can pick and choose the things that are relevant for you at whatever stage of maturity you're in. I think Jevon mentioned the pre-crawl stage, right? A new stage that he invented during his session. These are things that we need to think about the maturity, the areas that we're operating in terms of technology spend, in order to be successful. So Flexera can help you, as I said, in all scopes, in all domains, in all capabilities with the Flexera One platform. Super powerful modular solution underpinned by this technology and intelligence platform, where the magic happens with the data layer and the normalization. And of course, we can do everything from the cloud license management side of things, which is a great segue between your ITAM and SAM persona and your FinOps public cloud teams, looking at SaaS management and the applications that you're procuring there, for AI, looking at workload optimization, be it for, Spot or data clouds, and of course, things like commitment management and automating the purchase of commitments there, as well as that core cloud cost optimization capability with sustainability data. And many of you direct customers, of course, but there's also a partner layer here that enables our partners to resell, or where they're managing, cloud and reselling cloud services, to operate, the Flexera platform in that way, where they can resell customers and do billing and invoicing for public cloud spend. So lots of opportunities, whatever your needs are. Ultimately, our objective here is to maximize the savings, right, that customers are going to achieve. So yes, we need to achieve the visibility here of all of the spend that you're consuming. And that means we can then do budgeting and allocation. We can give you that license visibility. We can lay over things like sustainability and carbon data reporting. But then the levers that we pull at rate and workload are really exciting because they're aggregate, right? Up to 65% savings when you're using kind of discount management, and add on top of that the fact that you're not doing it yourself and you don't need an expensive SME to run that, and then start thinking about workload optimization. So stacking these things together is really important to consider. And ultimately, this is how our customers are, improving their margins, improving their profitability, and ultimately beating the competition in whatever kind of vertical and space they're operating in. All right. Well, I hope that was super useful for you. I certainly enjoyed having the opportunity to talk to you today. And we've got a few minutes now for questions. And I'll have a look in the Q&A in a minute to see what we've got there. Whilst I'm doing that, however, as I said, there's a great opportunity here. And I think, Jay mentioned this as well. Scan the QR code, take advantage of this great offer to have a free cloud savings analysis, right? Really quick to do, of course, no commitment, and that's going to get you up and running super quick. And then we're going to follow up next with our live panel. So I'll be looking forward to handing you off there. I'll leave the QR code on the screen whilst I just take a couple of questions. So let me just take a look at that now on the Q&A side of things. I have a couple that have come in. One is, what is the impact of AI on your API gateway costs? Oh, that's a great question, right? Absolutely. How do we monitor that? How do we get the visibility in terms of what's happening on the API gateway? And the secret there is, well, do we ingest the data? Do we know the usage data of the gateway so that we can start to analyze that or even allocate it? Is there metadata in the API calls that tell us which applications are generating those requests? And so the impact can be substantial. Jag, it's a great question. We can leverage AI both to monitor that and identify spikes, in the consumption, anomaly detection, if you will, against that, but only if we can obviously gather, the gateway metrics. So it's all about data ingestion and how we can do that. Happy to follow up with you offline if you wanted to. We've also got a question, implications on AI budgeting, forecasting, spend and consumption. It's a real challenge, as we've said, right? Super spiky, workloads and cost drivers going on here. But using AI can help us, right? We use AI and ML models for anomaly detection, for our forecasting models and other things. So whilst it's making the problem worse, we can also leverage those tools, as we said, using AI for FinOps to take some control over that. Got a few minutes left and a few more questions here. Let's have a look. Is this separate solution cost apart from Flexera 1 ITAM and Flexera 1 FSOM? That's absolutely a great question. And I'll just flick back, I think, to one of the slides here so we can just talk about that. The solution is modular. So absolutely, depending on what your needs are, Deepa was asking the question here, you can procure the modules that you need at any point in time. So cloud cost optimization and the ability to support and give you visibility of AI costs is a module. There's an add-on if you wanted sustainability data, but really each of the blue boxes here, you would procure independently depending on your needs. But again, I'd really encourage you to do the kind of, the free cost analysis exercise, because many of these deliver very quick returns that ultimately could fund your investment in the other modules that you might need here. And we'll have Mark has kind of raised a question here. Microsoft recently suggested AI agents may require software licenses similar to employees. That's a really great question there, Mark. Obviously, that has big implications for SaaS licensing. You'll be pleased to know, however, the Flexera On platform itself is not a per seat, per user-based license. The licensing is a different approach there. So you won't see increases in costs if AI agents are necessarily impacting or interacting with the platform here. All right, some great questions there. I think we've got maybe a minute or so still to go. Let me see if I've got anything else coming in here. Ken, in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges organizations face when making the transition from crawl to walk? That's a great question, Ken. And I think the answer for me is that organizations tend to get hung up on trying to improve the maturity of a particular capability, right? So if we thought about visibility of spend, we can spend a lot of time solving the visibility problem, particularly when we start to think about AI and we've got questions about API gateway and data at that kind of level. You're never going to complete the journey about ingesting data and getting complete visibility. And the real challenge that I see our customers having is getting bogged down in trying to solve that problem and get 100% visibility or 100% cost allocation, when the framework itself is about iteration, right? Inform, optimize, operate. Let's move around that, pretty swiftly and just drive continual improvement as we go. So really important to think about that and not just get bogged down. It's not going to be perfect the first time round, but that continual improvement exercise, I think, is a super way to think about that. We'll take one more question. I've got 40 or so seconds here, I think, before the panel. So when leveraging AI for FinOps, accuracy, hallucinations can be a concern based on the outcome, that AI produces. Again, we're super conscious about that. Having a really, accurate data layer it is really important and a great advantage for us as we sit AI tools on top of that. But we're also put in place governance and checks along the way. Happy to, again, to get into the specifics with anybody.